Hello and welcome to 5 Scrum Ceremonies. In this episode, we'll take a look at the 5 ceremonies of Scrum, starting with the very first one known as sprint planning. Sprint planning enables us answer 3 questions. Why is this sprint valuable? What can be done in this sprint? How will work get done? This is the very first thing that happens. It's ceremony number 1. It initiates the sprint by laying out the work to be performed for the sprint. The resulting plan is created by the collaborative work of the entire Scrum team. Now, the product owner ensures that people attending are prepared to discuss the most important product backlog items. Remember, the product owner is thinking value, value, value. The Scrum team may also invite other people to attend sprint planning to provide advice. Remember, it's a collaborative effort. What do we think about when we hear sprint planning? Business people and developers must work together daily. Now, this is an opportunity for business people and those on the team to work together. So, the question, why is this sprint valuable? The product owner poses how the product could increase its value and utility in the current sprint. Remember, the product owner is the chief value officer and is focused on value and prioritizing value. The sprint goal that communicates why the sprint is valuable to stakeholders also needs to be discussed. The sprint goal must be finalized prior to the end of sprint planning. The question, what can be done this sprint? Through discussion, the product owner and the team select items from the product backlog to include in the current sprint. The Scrum team may refine these items during this process, which increases understanding and confidence. Now, remember, coming into sprint planning, if this is not the first time, work has already been done and should have already been done in the previous sprint. Some measure of backlog refinement could have already started taking place, so this might not be the first encounter. In fact, some teams come into sprint planning right at the cusp of ready. In fact, those items are ready to go. So a lot of decomposition may not need to take place in sprint planning. Now, selecting how much can be completed within a sprint could be challenging. However, the more developers know about their past performance, their upcoming capacity, and their definition of done, the more confident they'll be in the sprint forecast. Let's answer the final one. How will the chosen work get done? For each product backlog item, the developers plan the work necessary to create an increment that meets the definition of done. This is often done by decomposing product backlog items into smaller work items of 1 day or less. Now, if you're getting ready for any of those professional exams, just be aware that this is where you can begin to think about breaking stories down even further into tasks. This is where it all happens. So the sprint goal, the product backlog items selected for the sprint, plus the plan for delivering them are together referred to as the sprint backlog. Sprint goal, product backlog items selected for the sprint, and the plan for delivering them. Keep that in the back of your mind. Let's go to our next one. The next one that happens here that we will talk about is the sprint. Now, when we talk about the sprint, remember the sprint is a container. When we say a container, we're talking about a container for all those other ceremonies. When we talk about the sprint, remember it is the heartbeat of Scrum, and this is where ideas are turned into value. Each event in Scrum is a formal opportunity to inspect and adapt Scrum artifacts. And that inspect adapt mechanism is what makes Scrum so great. Sprints are the heartbeat, and this is where work is done. This is where ideas are turned into value. Now, during the sprint, a few rules. No changes are made that would endanger the sprint goal. Think about it like a type of lockdown. Once that sprint is in motion, don't rock the boat. Now, that is not to say things may not need to change in a firm within the backlog really urgently, but as much as possible, we discourage changes during the sprint. Quality does not decrease, the The product backlog is refined as needed because in the middle of that sprint, we're going to have backlog refinement, which is not one of the formal ceremonies. Scope may be clarified and renegotiated with the product owner as more is learned. Sprints enable predictability by ensuring inspection and adaptation of progress towards a product goal at least every calendar month. When a sprint's horizon is too long, what happens? The sprint goal could become invalid. You could have erosion of revenues or profits. And for that reason, we want each sprint to be considered as a short project. Let's talk about the next one. It's the daily scrum. You may hear the daily scrum being referred to as the daily stand-up meeting. The daily scrum is a 15-minute event for the developers of the Scrum team. Now, when we say developers, remember, we're talking about the team carrying out the work. If you are on a non-IT project, these could be writers, they could be people who are involved in bringing subject matter expertise, but not necessarily coders and testers. So we use the word developers quite broadly. So the daily scrum is where we inspect progress towards the sprint goal and where we adapt the sprint backlog as necessary. This is also where we identify impediments. So again, the purpose of the daily scrum is to inspect progress towards the sprint goal and adapt the sprint backlog as necessary, adjusting the upcoming planned work. The team can select whatever structure and techniques they want for the daily scrum as long as the daily scrum focuses on progress towards the sprint goal and produces an actionable plan for the next day of work. This creates focus and improves self-management. Now, you do remember that daily scrums could be run in two ways. The first way is the three questions. What did you do yesterday? What do you plan to do today? What are the impediments that stand in your way, if any? But you could also choose to walk the board and start from the right-hand side, those items that are close to getting done, and asking the question, how do we move this to done? Daily scrums improve communication, identify impediments, promote quick decision-making, and consequently eliminate the need for other meetings. The daily scrum is not the only time developers are allowed to adjust their plan. They often meet throughout the day for more detailed discussions about adapting or replanning the rest of the sprint's work. Now, do recall, we don't want an anti-pattern of giving status in the daily scrum. Instead, we want to take any sidebar conversations that need to happen outside of the scrum. If impediments are realized, the follow-on discussions take place outside. If the team needs to meet in pods, they can do that outside of the daily scrum. Let's talk about the next one. It's a sprint review. The purpose of the sprint review is to inspect the outcome of the sprint and determine future adaptations. We want to inspect the outcome of the sprint and determine future adaptations. Who does this? Recall, the product owner is front and center, and the product owner knows who to invite to this meeting. During the event, the Scrum team and stakeholders review what was completed in the sprint and what has changed in the environment. Based on this information, attendees collaborate on what to do next. It is important that we do not relegate the sprint review to just a demo. It is more than a demo. It is a working meeting. The product backlog may also be adjusted to meet new opportunities. The sprint review is a working session, and the Scrum team should avoid limiting it to a mere presentation. The sprint review is the second to the last event of the sprint and is time boxed to a maximum of 4 hours for a 1 month sprint. For shorter sprints, the event is usually shorter. Let's talk about the final one here. Final one is the Sprint Retrospective, and by far, it is one of the most valuable ceremonies, if not the most valuable ceremony in the eyes of true Scrummers. True Scrummers know that the Sprint Retrospective is where you get the value for the next improvement. How are you going to improve on what the team is doing? Well, it's through realizing how to increase quality and effectiveness in the Sprint Retrospective. So this is where we plan ways to increase quality and effectiveness, and this helps us get better and better, so we offer more and more precise, predictable value to our customers. The Scrum team inspects how the last sprint went with regards to individuals, interactions, processes, and tools. Remember, it's all about individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It's all about at the end of the sprint, looking back in the rearview mirror and seeing how to improve, just like the final principle in the manifesto tells us. The Scrum team inspects how the last sprint went with regards to individuals. People come clean, people are honest. There's a term my buddy Roy and I use which says Agile Vegas. Whatever happens in the sprint retrospective stays there. This is not where we collect lessons learned in documentation. No, instead, we want the team to be raw, candid, and honest. We want the team to challenge each other in a positive way and to find how to move to that next quality level and effectiveness. So the Scrum team identifies the most helpful changes to improve its effectiveness. The most impactful improvements are addressed as soon as possible. They may even be added to the sprint backlog for the next sprint. Think of these as actions to be taken to give value. It's all about value. So the sprint retrospective concludes the sprint. It is time boxed to a maximum of 3 hours for a 1 month sprint. For shorter sprints, the event is usually shorter. And that's it, the 5 Scrum ceremonies. I hope you found value from it. Remember, if you are studying for one of those professional exams that has its own unique slant, there are few words that you need to keep in mind, especially if you're studying for an exam like the PMP exam. So let's talk a little bit about some of these, and I'll highlight a few keywords for you. The PMI might refer to this as retrospective. They call it the single most important practice because this is where the team learns to improve and adapt. Retrospectives help the team learn from previous work on the product and its process. One of the principles, remember, at regular intervals, a team reflects on how to become more effective, tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. The next one is what we will call daily stand-ups, but it's really the daily scrum. The PMI used the word daily stand-up, and they talk about micro-committing to each other and uncovering problems and ensuring the work flows smoothly. They talk about 2 ways, which I mentioned earlier, daily stand-up with 3 questions or the daily stand-up with walking the Kanban or task board. When we talk about this PMP exam, you must remember that they will not call everything exactly how it is named in the Scrum Guide. So the sprint review is referred to as demos, demonstrations, or reviews. And as usual, this is where the team completes the features. Now, there's a key sentence here that you have to be careful about in the Agile Practice Guide. I don't want you to get the impression that it is just the product owner who decides this is it. When the PMI used the word product owner in context, understand that they're really referring to the customer as well, because after all, the product owner is the customer's mouthpiece. So it reads, teams, including the product owner, need feedback to decide how early to ask for product feedback. And it goes on, but it says, the team periodically demonstrates the working product. The product owner sees the demonstration and accepts or declines stories. Well, it's a lot more than that in the real world. In the real world, the product owner knows who to invite from the business, and the product owner's business representatives that come in, they could decide yay or nay. It's not just about the product owner, so keep that in mind. I hope this adds value to you as you get ready for your test. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.